You abandoned your own son. And now you want to come back into his life? After 24 years.
Do you know that feeling when the past knocks on your door unannounced? When something you thought you'd left behind comes back with full force? That's the story of Marcus, a young businessman who grew up knowing he was abandoned as a baby. He was at peace with that. He had an incredible father who chose to love him. But then she appeared, the woman who left him that cold night crying in front of a stranger's house. And what happened after that? Man, it's something that will affect you in a way you're not expecting. Stay until the end, because this story will make you rethink a lot about forgiveness, family, and the choices we make when we're desperate. So subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get to the story. It was a winter night in Chicago, the kind of night that freezes you to the bone. November 1999. Richard Montgomery had just arrived home after another exhausting day at the office. He owned a rapidly growing financial consulting firm, but none of that mattered much to him at that point in his life. It had only been 3 months since he lost his wife, Catherine, in a car accident. 3 months that felt like 3 years. Richard was 35 years old, his hair beginning to turn gray at the sides, his deep brown eyes now carrying a permanent sadness. He and Catherine had tried to have children for years. Treatments, hopes, disappointments. Nothing worked. And now she was gone, and the 3-story house in Lincoln Park seemed like an empty mausoleum. He parked the BMW in the garage, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked across the side garden to the front door. That's when he heard it, a cry, a baby's cry. Richard stopped, confused. He looked around. The sound was coming from the front porch. He quickened his pace, feeling his heart race, and when he turned the corner of the house, he saw it. A baby, a little black boy. He couldn't have been more than a year old, wrapped in a worn blue blanket inside a wicker basket, screaming at the top of his lungs. Next to the basket, a crumpled note. Richard stood frozen for a few seconds, looking around the silent street. Nobody. No cars, no people. Only the desperate cries of that child in what must have been a near-freezing temperature. He knelt down, picked up the baby in his arms with that awkward way of someone who had never held a child before. The boy was cold, his lips somewhat purple. Richard immediately took off his own coat and wrapped it around the little boy, pressing him against his chest to keep him warm. Calm down, calm down. Everything's all right now, he murmured, even without knowing if it really was. She took the ticket with her other hand. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. Please take care of him. I can't, I'm sorry. His name is Marcus, that's all. Nothing more. No explanation, no phone call, nothing. Richard rushed inside the house, still holding the baby. He called emergency services, the police, and his family doctor. The house descended into chaos in the following hours. Paramedics checked on the baby, police officers asked questions, and social services arrived to assess the situation. Marcus was dehydrated and slightly hypothermic, but he would be fine. The social worker, a woman named Dorothy, around 50 years old with a tired look of someone who had seen it all, explained the procedure. He'll need to go to a temporary home while we try to locate his mother or a relative, she said, adjusting her glasses. You did the right thing to call. What if nobody shows up? Richard asked, surprising even himself. Dorothy looked at him with the expression of someone who'd heard that question before. He goes into the adoption system. It can take some time, but babies are usually adopted quickly. Richard looked at the boy, who was now asleep on the sofa, wrapped in warm blankets, a digital thermometer pinned to his forehead. Something shifted within him at that moment. Something he couldn't explain. What if I want to stay with him? The room fell silent. Dorothy took off her glasses, cleaned the lenses, and put them back on. She studied Richard for a long moment. Mr. Montgomery, do you understand what you're saying? You just lost your wife 3 months ago. Adopting a child isn't... I know what I'm saying, Richard interrupted, his voice firm. This child was left on my doorstep. On my doorstep, Dorothy. Of all the houses in this town, someone chose mine. I lost my wife. She and I never managed to have children, and now there's a baby here who needs someone. I have the financial means, I have a house, I have stability. What I don't have is a family. And maybe he doesn't either. Dorothy sighed deeply. It's not that simple. There will be evaluations, processes, home visits. And Mr. Montgomery, with all due respect, you are a single middle-aged man with no experience with children. The process will be difficult. I don't mind. And he really didn't care. For the first time in 3 months, Richard Montgomery felt something other than sadness. He felt purpose. The first few months were a personal hell. Richard had no idea what he was doing. Diapers, bottles, sleepless nights, constant crying. Marcus had colic, night terrors, and difficulty eating. Richard called nurses, pediatricians, read books, watched videos. There were days when he sat on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m, with Marcus screaming in his lap, and he cried too. "Catherine, if you're up there, I need a little help here," he whispered once, looking at the ceiling. "Because I don't know what I'm doing." But he didn't give up. Not for a single day. Not even when Marcus vomited all over his $2,000 Italian suit. Not even when he had to cancel 3 important meetings because the boy had a fever. Not even when his partners delicately suggested that perhaps he should reconsider the situation. Slowly, very slowly, things began to improve. Marcus started sleeping better. He began to smile when he saw Richard arrive. After 6 months of temporary guardianship, he took his first steps and went straight into Richard's arms. "Dad," was Marcus's first word. Richard cried. He really cried. Right there in the middle of the room with the little boy clinging to his legs. The adoption process was finalized when Marcus was 2.5 years old. The judge, a gray-haired gentleman named Wallace, looked at Richard and the boy who was sitting on his lap, playing with his father's tie. "Mr. Montgomery, it is rare for me to see a transformation like the one I have seen in these files. All reports indicate that you have become an exemplary father. Marcus is a happy, healthy, and loved child. It is an honor to declare this adoption finalized." Richard pressed Marcus against his chest. "Thank you, Your Excellency. But it was I who was transformed here." And it was true. Marcus brought light back into that house. Richard hired a wonderful nanny, a Jamaican lady named Miss Betty, who helped a lot in the early years. But he insisted on being present for everything. He took Marcus to school, picked him up, went to parent-teacher meetings, soccer games, birthday parties. Richard never hid the truth from Marcus. When the boy was about 5 years old and started asking questions about his mother, Richard was honest. "Your biological mother left you on our doorstep when you were very little," he explained, kneeling in front of his son. "She couldn't take care of you, so she brought you here. And I found you and I loved you from the very first second." "She didn't want me?" Marcus asked with those big, confused eyes. "Son, I don't know what was going through her head. But I know one thing. I want you. I chose you. And I will love you every day of my life." Marcus hugged his father tightly. "I love you too, Dad." As Marcus grew older, the bond between them only grew stronger. Richard taught his son about business, about ethics, about treating people with respect. Marcus was intelligent, curious, charismatic. He had the smile of the mother he never knew, and the determination of the father who chose to love him. In high school, Marcus was popular, got excellent grades, and played basketball. Richard never missed a game. He always sat in the front row of the bleachers in a suit after work, shouting and celebrating like any proud father. When Marcus graduated from Northwestern University's business school, Richard cried in the middle of the ceremony. His son, that baby he found nearly freezing on a cold night, was now there at 23 years old, receiving his diploma with honors. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," Marcus said later, the two of them alone in the parking lot. "Everything I am is because of you." "No, son," Richard replied, his voice breaking. "You've always had this inside you. I just had the privilege of watching you grow up." Marcus started working at Montgomery Financial Consulting. Richard insisted that he start from the bottom, as a junior analyst. "No privileges here," he warned. "You'll earn your place like everyone else," and Marcus won. He was dedicated, arrived early, left late, treated everyone well, from interns to directors. In 2 years, he was promoted to manager. In 4, he was already leading important projects. Everyone in the company loved Marcus. He had that rare ability to be professional without losing his humanity. It was an ordinary Tuesday in March when everything changed. Marcus was 24 years old and was in his office reviewing reports when his secretary, Jennifer, knocked on the door. "Marcus, there's a woman at reception asking to speak with you. She says it's personal." "Any customers?" No, she didn't want to give the name. But she said it's important, very important. Marcus frowned but went down to the reception area, and when he saw the woman who was waiting for him, the world stopped. She must have been about 42 or 43 years old. Dark skin, curly hair tied in a bun, eyes that were exactly like his. She wore a simple navy blue dress and held a purse like a shield. When she saw Marcus, her eyes instantly filled with tears. Marcus, she whispered. He froze. On a deep instinctive level, he already knew, but he couldn't process it. I am your mother, she said, her voice breaking. My name is Nia. Marcus's blood ran cold. 24 years. 24 years and she shows up like this out of nowhere at his workplace? We need to talk somewhere private, he said, his voice controlled but firm. It wasn't a request. It was an order. They went into an empty meeting room upstairs. Marcus closed the door, crossed his arms, and stood there looking at her like a judge looks at a defendant. 24 years, he began. You left me in a basket in front of a stranger's house on a night when it was almost freezing. Do you know I nearly died of hypothermia? Marcus, I'm not finished. His voice trembled with suppressed anger. You didn't leave a phone number, an address, nothing. Just a miserable 4-line note. And now you show up here at my work as if nothing happened? Nia was openly crying now. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. Anger? Marcus gave a bitter laugh. Anger doesn't even come close to what I'm feeling. You abandoned me. You threw me away like I was trash. That's not how it was, she practically shouted, then controlled her voice. Please, Marcus. Let me explain. Just give me 5 minutes. Marcus glanced at his watch, an exaggerated, dramatic gesture. 5 minutes. Nia took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and began. I was 17, Marcus. 17. I was a stupid, irresponsible kid who got pregnant by a boy who swore he loved me and disappeared the second he found out. My family kicked me out of the house. I was alone, penniless, living in a shelter. When you were born, I tried. God knows I tried. But I had no way to take care of you. I had no job, nowhere to live. I barely had food for myself. She paused, her voice breaking. I breastfed you for 3 months. 3 months sharing a shelter room with 4 other women, waking up every night, holding you while you cried, knowing I couldn't give you anything. Nothing but poverty and suffering. And then someone at the shelter told me about leaving babies in safe places, fire stations, churches, the homes of people with resources. Marcus shook his head skeptically. So you left me at the first big house you saw? No, Nia said firmly. I spent days researching. Days. I found out who Richard Montgomery was. I found out that he had just lost his wife, that he and she had tried to have children and couldn't, that he was a good, decent man with resources. I chose that house, Marcus. I left you there because I knew. I hoped he would give you what I couldn't. You didn't have the right to make that choice, Marcus said, but his voice was less harsh now. I know, but it was the only choice I could make, and it destroyed me. It destroyed me completely. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down, suddenly tired. And why do you show up now, after all this time? Nia sat down too on the edge of the chair. Because I couldn't live without trying anymore. I moved to Oregon after that. I went back to school, graduated, became a teacher. I drew closer to God because it was the only thing that kept me going. But there wasn't a single day, Marcus, not a single day in these 24 years that I didn't think about you, that I didn't pray for you, that I didn't wonder if you were okay, if you were happy, if you hated me. I hated you, Marcus admitted, for a long time. I understand. They were silent for a moment. What do you want from me? Marcus finally asked. Nothing, Nia said, and she sounded sincere. I don't want money. I don't want to show up in your life and cause drama. I just wanted you to know the truth, that I didn't abandon you because I didn't love you. I abandoned you because I loved you too much to condemn you to the life I had back then. Marcus ran a hand over his face, exhausted. I need to process this. I understand. I'll leave. Nia stood up, picked up her purse. She took a card from her pocket and placed it on the table. This is my number, if you ever want to talk. But if you don't, I'll understand too. And Marcus? I'm so proud of the man you've become. She left the room. Marcus sat there for about 20 minutes, just staring at the wall, trying to understand what had just happened. When Richard arrived home that night, he immediately realized something was wrong. What happened? Marcus told him everything. Richard listened silently, sitting on the sofa, his hands clasped together. And how are you feeling? Richard asked when Marcus finished. I don't know, Dad. I'm confused, angry, but also, I don't know. Part of me wants to understand, wants to know more. Richard was quiet for a moment. Son, I'm going to tell you something you might not want to hear, but you need to. Nia didn't leave you because she didn't love you. She left you with me because she loved you. And in the process, she gave me the greatest gift of my life, you. Marcus looked at his father, surprised. "I'm not saying you have to forgive her," Richard continued. "That's something only you can decide in your own time. But I am saying that maybe it's worth listening, really listening. Because holding on to anger will only hurt you, not her." Marcus carried that card in his pocket for 3 weeks before finally calling. Nia answered on the second ring. "Marcus? I thought maybe we could grab a coffee, have a real conversation." "I would love to," she said, and he could hear the relief in her voice. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in downtown Chicago the following Saturday. Marcus arrived first, nervous and fiddling with his phone. When Nia entered, she seemed just as nervous as he was. They ordered coffee, remained in awkward silence for a few seconds until they both tried to speak at the same time and laughed awkwardly. "You first," Marcus said. Nia took a deep breath. "I want to tell you about everything that happened afterward. If you want to listen, I want." And she told her story. She told her story about Oregon, about going back to school at night while working as a waitress during the day. She told her story about the nights she cried, the depression, the suicidal thoughts. She told her story about the small church she found, the pastor who welcomed her, the community that helped her heal. "Faith saved me," she said simply. "When I had nothing left, God was there, and I promised that if I ever had the chance to see you again to ask for your forgiveness, I would." Marcus heard everything, and something began to change inside him. The anger he had carried for so long began to soften. "Do you teach now?" he asked. "Yes, 3rd grade. It's the thing I love most besides finally finding you." They talked for 3 hours. About everything. About Marcus's life, about Nia's life, about regrets and forgiveness and faith. When the cafe started to close, they were still talking. "Marcus," Nia said as they were leaving, "I know this doesn't erase the past, but could we maybe try to build a future, slowly?" Marcus looked at her. He saw hope in her eyes. He also saw the fear of rejection. "Slowly," he agreed. "We can try." Her smile lit up her whole face. In the following months, Marcus and Nia began seeing each other regularly. A coffee every 2 weeks turned into lunch every week. Nia began to learn about Marcus's life, his friends, his work. And one day she asked, "Would you like to go to church with me one Sunday?" Marcus had never been very religious. Richard had taken him to church a few times as a child, but it wasn't a regular thing. But something about the way Nia asked with that vulnerability, "I go." The church was small in a simple neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, but it had an energy Marcus had never felt before. The people were warm, genuine. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, about second chances, about how God works in mysterious ways. Marcus looked at Nia during the sermon and saw tears streaming down her face. He took her hand and squeezed it. She looked at him, surprised and grateful. After the service, while walking through the parking lot, Marcus said, "Thank you for bringing me here." "Thank you for coming," Nia replied. "This means the world to me. I think I'm ready to stop holding on to anger," Marcus said, stopping and looking at her. "I forgive you, Mom." It was the first time he had called her Mom. Nia broke down crying right there in the parking lot, and Marcus hugged her, really hugged her, for the first time in 24 years. Richard was happy about Marcus and Nia getting closer. He invited her over for dinner a few times, and the three of them shared stories and laughs. And then something unexpected happened. Richard and Nia started talking more. About life, about faith, about their experiences of being Marcus's parents in such different ways. They discovered they had a lot in common. They had both been profoundly transformed by that boy. They both had faith, similar values, similar worldviews. 6 months after that first coffee, Richard called Marcus to his home office. "Dad, is everything all right?" Marcus asked, entering the office. Richard seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. "Son, I need to talk to you about something delicate." Marcus sat down. "What is it?" Richard walked to the window, looked out at the garden, and gathered his courage. "Nia and I have grown very close in the last few months, and I've developed feelings for her." Marcus blinked, processing. "Feelings? You mean romantic?" "Yes." Richard turned to face his son. "I know this is strange. She's your biological mother, I'm your adoptive father. But Marcus, I haven't felt this way about anyone since Catherine. And I wasn't going to go through with it without talking to you first." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he started laughing. "Dad, are you asking my permission to date my mother?" Richard blushed. "When you talk like that, it sounds really strange." It's strange. Marcus laughed even more. But it's also, I don't know, it's beautiful. In a totally crazy way, it's beautiful. So you don't care. Marcus stood up and put his hand on his father's shoulder. Dad, you gave me everything. You saved me, raised me, loved me when no one else was there to do it. If Nia makes you happy, if you make her happy, man, I'm so happy for both of you. Richard hugged his son tightly. Thank you, son. This means everything to me. But Dad, Marcus said when they parted ways, try? If you hurt her, I'll have to defend my mother, Marcus joked. What if she hurts me? Then I'll have to defend you. It's going to be a complicated situation. They both laughed. Richard and Nia officially started dating. It was an awkward dynamic at first, but somehow it worked. Marcus saw them happy together, and it brought him a peace he didn't know he was missing. It was as if the pieces had finally fallen into place. A year later, Marcus was the one who started attending church regularly, not just when he went with Nia. He had found something there, a community, a spiritual purpose he didn't know he needed. It was on one of those Sundays that he saw her, Sarah. She volunteered in children's ministry and had a smile that lit up the whole room. Fair skin, wavy blonde hair, bright blue eyes. She worked as a pediatric nurse and had that warm, welcoming energy that immediately made the children, and Marcus, feel at peace. They started talking after church services. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into dinner. Within 6 months, Marcus knew he had found the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. He proposed to Sarah on a Saturday afternoon in the same park where they had their first date. She said yes before he even finished asking the question. That's when Richard also proposed to Nia. And then the crazy idea came up, what if they had a double wedding? That would be perfect, Nia said, her eyes sparkling. We started as a family in an unconventional way. Let's celebrate that in an unconventional way too. The wedding was beautiful, small, intimate, in the church that had become the center of their spiritual lives. Marcus and Sarah on one side, Richard and Nia on the other. The pastor, a 60-year-old black man named Bishop Davis, who had been with them throughout their journey, officiated a ceremony that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Family isn't just blood, he said in his sermon. Family is a choice. It's love. It's forgiveness. It's God putting broken pieces together and creating something beautiful. And what I'm seeing here today is living proof of that. Marcus looked at Sarah, his wife. He looked at his father and mother, now husband and wife. He thought of that baby who almost died on a cold night, abandoned in a basket. And he realized it hadn't been abandonment. It had been salvation. For him, for Richard, for Nia. They had all been saved in different ways, and now they were there, a complete, unlikely, beautiful family. After the wedding, Marcus and Sarah moved into a cozy house in Oak Park. Richard and Nia stayed in the large house in Lincoln Park, but they saw each other constantly. Sunday dinners, holidays together, family vacations. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to a girl, Emily Catherine Montgomery, named after the grandmother she never met. When Marcus held his daughter for the first time, he cried. She will never question whether she is loved, he whispered to Sarah. Never. Richard and Nia were devoted, loving grandparents. And as Emily grew up, Marcus realized how the cycle had been broken. Generations of pain, abandonment, loneliness, all interrupted by choices of love, forgiveness, and faith. He thought about this while watching Emily playing in the garden, Richard teaching her to garden, Nia telling stories. Sarah was beside him, pregnant with their second child. What are you thinking about? Sarah asked, noticing her husband's distant gaze. I'm thinking God is crazy, Marcus laughed. He took the worst night of my life, turned me into an abandoned baby in a basket, and used that to create all of this. A family, a purpose, love. Sarah kissed his cheek. He has an interesting sense of humor. It really does. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Marcus called his father. Dad, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for what, son? For finding me. For choosing me. For loving me even when it must have been incredibly difficult. He could hear the emotion in Richard's voice when he replied, Marcus, you don't have to thank me. You saved my life just as much as I saved yours. I know, but even so, thank you. After hanging up, Marcus went to Emily's room. He watched his daughter sleeping, her chest rising and falling in a tranquil rhythm. He thought about all the choices that had led up to that moment. Nia's choice to leave him in a safe house. Richard's choice to stay with him, his choice to forgive, their collective choice to build something new from the ashes, and he realized that this was the true definition of family. Not blood, not DNA, but love. A deliberate choice to love day after day even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Marcus knelt beside his daughter's crib and said a prayer. He gave thanks for every person who had crossed his path, for every difficult decision that had led him there, for every moment of pain that had been transformed into something beautiful. "Thank you," he whispered in the darkness of the room. "Thank you for everything." And outside, through the window, the stars shone over Chicago, over that unlikely family, over all the lives that had been intertwined by a cold winter night and an impossible choice that turned out to be the right one of all. Marcus returned to the room where Sarah was waiting for him. He sat beside her on the sofa, placed his hand on her belly where their second child was growing, and smiled. "His name will be Richard," Marcus said. "If it's a boy," Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. "Your father will love it." "I know." They stood there in comfortable silence, planning for the future while honoring the past. And Marcus understood, finally and completely, that he had been blessed beyond measure. He had been abandoned, yes, but he had also been chosen, twice, by a father who found him and by a mother who returned. And now he could choose too, to choose to love, to choose to forgive, to choose to build something greater than himself. And this, he realized, was the story he was going to tell his children. Not a story of abandonment, but a story of redemption, of how God takes our worst moments and transforms them into our greatest testimonies. It's about how family isn't where you start, but where you choose to belong. And Marcus Montgomery, that baby who almost died on a cold night, chose to belong to love. And love, in the end, always wins. Look, this story really gets to you because it shows that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are the beginning of something incredible. Marcus was abandoned, yes, but he was also chosen. And chosen again. And in the end, he learned that family has nothing to do with blood. It has to do with who stays, who loves, who doesn't give up. Nia made an impossible choice that turned into the greatest blessing. Richard made a courageous choice that filled the void in his heart. And Marcus made the hardest choice of all, to forgive. And it was this forgiveness that allowed everyone to find peace. Sometimes God uses the most painful situations to create the most beautiful stories. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like, comment what you thought, and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to stories that will make you reflect on what really matters in life.